This is Whiskey Whereabouts. I'm Tim, and it's week 4 of MALT Madness. And we've got a pretty strong group today. We've got a couple 18-year single malts, 15-year single malts, some official, kind of well-known bottling. It's going to be a tight matchup. It starts right now. My whiskey journey has taken me to Scotland and back. I've explored whiskey education, tastings, and distilleries from Islay to Speyside. And now my journey continues here, with you, on Whiskey Whereabouts. So as I said at the top, this is week 4 of the MALT Madness tournament. If you don't know what that is, or if you haven't seen any of these yet, I'll put a link to the most recent group, week 3, right here for you to check out. And basically we've got 25 whiskey samples. They're in 5 different flights. We're choosing from blind tastings, one winner from each group, and then they're going to face off in a final tasting to crown the champion. At the end, all of these samples are from last year's premium Scotch Whiskey Advent Calendar from the really good whiskey company's Cask Explorer series. Today, we're doing the 4th group. This is the Gray Seal group, and next week, we're going to have the 5th group. That is going to be the Badger group and the final. So it all comes down to next week's episode. We're going to crown the champion in that episode. For now, let's meet the competitors for the Gray Seal group. Starting off with the lowest seeded competitor in this group of 5. It's the 16 seed in the tournament overall. It's AnCnoc 18 year. It's a 46% whiskey from the Knockdo distillery. It's non-chill filtered. There's no color added, and it's sherry and bourbon matured. So we're starting there with the lowest seeded whiskey, a pretty strong whiskey. Next up, the 15 seed overall. It's Old Pulteney, 15 year, the Maritime Malt. It's 46%, and it's bourbon and sherry matured. It's non-chill filtered and no color added whiskey with that 15 year from the Old Pulteney. Next, 14 seed. We've got a blended Scotch whiskey in the mix. It's from Antiquary, and it is a 15-year blended Scotch whiskey matured in Bordeaux wine casks. It's bottled at 43%. We have, at the 8 seed overall, Glenfarclas 15-year, 46%, fully sherry matured, non-chill filtered, no color added whiskey. Kind of a staple sherry matured Speyside whiskey. And the most highly seeded whiskey in this group, Jura 18 year. It's 44% whiskey. This is bourbon matured whiskey. It's finished in European red wine casks. Doesn't have a very good presentation. It's a little light on the ABV, chill filtered, with color added. So once again, the competitors have taken the court. They have been poured. They have had time to breathe. They've been placed randomly. I don't know which is which. So I'm going to start, as I always do, on the left side and call this whiskey number 1 and work my way through the flight. So starting off with whiskey number 1. So yeah, pretty nice nose here on whiskey number 1. It's sweet, it's toasty, it has sherry elements. It definitely has a little bit of that citrus, a little bit of that sherry sweetness to it. Like I said, there's a sort of mild, sort of just toasty, kind of roastiness, toasted nut kind of quality on the nose. Pretty big, round flavors on the nose. So pretty inviting here for whiskey number 1. Let's check it out on the palate now. On whiskey number 1, not the greatest mouthfeel, but the flavor's bold. And you've got a lot of sweet elements and some bitter elements sort of mixed in. So it has a sort of ashy / sort of bitter, coffee, oaky sort of element. The longer you hold it on the palate, the sweet sort of comes first, and it's honey sweet. It's rich. It's almost chocolatey, and there is like I said before in the nose, a sort of a nuttiness, like a peanut. I'm gonna go back one more time here just to differentiate the finish. Whiskey number 1, finish. Medium to long. The bitter kind of elements staying with you long. It's the fruitiest part. There's a fruity kind of element, a red kind of rich, sweet red fruit. There's an oaky kind of bitter that runs through, and there is that sort of sweet element. Now it's a little bit more orange vanilla maybe than that sort of richer chocolate on the palate, but altogether a pretty nice experience. Moving on to whiskey number 2 on the nose. This nose is pretty weak, pretty floral, pretty perfumed, pretty delicate notes to start. Beneath that, there's a brassiness, and there is some sweeter element Yeah, it's more vanilla honey kind of, but really pulling on this one. No heat at all. Really trying to pull the notes out of the nose. So pretty muted on the nose on this whiskey. Let's see if the palate comes in any stronger on whiskey number 2. Yeah, so the palate on this one is pretty watery. It doesn't have very much of a mouthfeel. It doesn't have much complexity. There is a sort of a caramel sweet, a little stickier. It's much richer than the nose on the palate, I can say that. Just the ghost of maybe a little bit of a sort of a peppery tingle. It's not hot at all. There's not that much in terms of richness here. It's not all floral or flowery or gardeny the way I was able to kind of lock into with the nose on the palate. It's much more satisfying. It's pretty. There's nothing offensive here, but it's not really doing anything interesting. It's kind of one note. Let's go back and check it out on the nose now. Medium on the finish, watery. There's a little bit of a sort of a perfume cloud, kind of a little bit of alcohol at the back of your sinuses. There's a slightly bitter aftertaste, not really balanced with anything else. So here we go, stepping up to the nose on whiskey number 3. Yeah, what a difference going from whiskey number 2 here to the whiskey I have in my hand. So much more robust on the nose, and so many notes, more notes being played here on the nose. So there's a little bit more heat here. It's not hot, but you just have that element, that cloud hanging over it a little bit. Rich, chocolate, cocoa, sticky kind of sherry, sweet, brown sugar reduction, organic sort of green kind of soil element here. Almost a brassy kind of note. Rich, like I said, a little bit of, contrasting notes makes it interesting. Interesting nose here on whiskey number 1. Let's go in on the palate. Okay, so now a pretty solid mouthfeel. It's not syrupy, but it's richer on the mouthfeel, and there is a sort of very rich and robust sweetness. There's that raisin, that chocolate, not really syrupy, but rich, creamy. There is a sort of a black pepper kind of liveliness note to it, offsetting the sweetness. There is that sort of brown sugar kind of envelope, and it has a real depth that I think probably both of the first 2 whiskeys lacked, but obviously definitely this second whiskey number 2. Let's go back in on the finish as it sort of first hits the finish. That same set of flavors carries through, and then as it dissipates, a really nice mellow sort of plume, a little bit of alcohol heat, and a nice sort of contrasting dusting of just a little bit of that sort of bittery, kind of oaky, kind of down the middle of the tongue. But that sweetness, it's just, the finish is very drying. It dries out the sweetness, and what's left behind is like a concentrated kind of distillate, like a powder remaining of that sort of sweet kind of brown sugar chocolate kind of sweet around on the sides. It's pretty pleasant. It's very kind of satisfying. It makes you want to go for another taste. So I have to say, this is the sort of lead whiskey so far in the flight. Moving on to whiskey number 4 on the nose. Yeah, fresh cut flowers in a vase. Next level down is the sweetness. Vanilla, honey, the citrus. Pretty intriguing. It's a nice combination here. So let's check it out on the palate. It has that sort of rich, round, kind of chocolatey flavor on the palate. It has an oakiness. The finish is pretty interesting. Going back in now, very nice finish. It comes in with the sweetness, and it develops pretty quickly into something a lot more organic. And as it kind of develops and dissipates, you're kind of left with the sort of remnants of the sweetness kind of on the edges. And what it's replaced it with is that much more pungent green kind of note and quality that is sort of undercutting and complementing the sweetness at the same time. And so you've got 3 distinct stages with this whiskey, and that final sort of finish really kind of shifts gear. So on to the final whiskey. Whiskey number 5. A little bit more subdued here. That's my first, after the last 2 on the nose, but there's something here. Yeah, this has a more traditional sort of sherry sweet, brown sugar, raisin. There's a mintiness, a minty kind of freshness here. There's citrus, and it is orange citrus, but it's not sickly sweet either. There's something else here wrapping around it. It's not really a perfumey, it's not really floral because it really can't fight against the sweetness of that profile, but there's just an envelope here of some, of a little bit of the sort of alcohol presence is there. Pretty welcoming, gives it kind of a depth beyond just that high sort of sweet note on the nose. Here we go on the palate. Whiskey number 5. Yeah, solid mouthfeel, rich, almost milk chocolate, sweet elements. Not huge. It's not a huge, kind of overwhelming flavor profile on the palate. It has a real roundness. It's very pleasant. It's a very pleasant sipping sort of whiskey here. The finish finally turns over another card. So let me go back one more time. When it hits, you get a plume, a little bit of alcohol kind of plume into your sinus, and you get that chocolatey sweet is really interacting here with some of the bitter elements. There's a resurgence. And now it's almost like honey lozenge has been dropped in that mix of the sort of richer sweetness that we've had. So there's a brightness, and it's still sweet, but it's a little bit different, and it kind of just comes right at the end. It really develops into it while the finish dissipates. It's pretty nice. It's pretty inviting. I'm going to take a minute, kind of taste and compare, and I'm going to then come back and reveal my rankings and the winner. Okay, so I'm ready to reveal my rankings. I think there's one clear winner, and then it gets kind of pretty tight after that in the middle. You know which is which, I don't, but I'm going to start with the weakest whiskey. I don't think it's any surprise here that whiskey number 2 is the weakest, lowest ranked whiskey, and not really on the same level as some of the other whiskeys. Whiskey number 1 is going to be the second ranked whiskey after that one. Then for the third position, I'm going to take whiskey number 5. And then we're going to leave whiskey number 4 where it is. Whiskey number 3 becomes the winner. So we have a winner, and it's AnCnoc 18 year, the clear winner, I think. So now we have 4 finalists, and we're going to find out next week how AnCnoc 18 is going to perform against the other finalists. The 5th group is going to be decided in next week's episode, and then we're going to immediately go into the final, pitting the 5 winners against each other. You do not want to miss this, so make sure that if you haven't, you've subscribed. That's what this big button that's popping up right over here is for, and I will see you next week for the final flight and the final championship. You don't want to miss it.